And welcome back. My next guest is Joseph Porrovecchio, a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
So, Joe, delighted to have you on the program. I know that you recently were the Grand Marshal for the parade this past year over in Congress, and you have been invited to become a board member of the Congress VMA. You've got a long and distinguished service in the U.S. Army, retired lieutenant colonel, awarded the Bronze Star, served for a good number of years, and then came back to active duty in Afghanistan after your retirement, called back onto duty. So we want to kind of get into your experiences a little bit about your career, but before we get to that, maybe we can get to your family background. Where were you born and raised, and how'd you come to Rockland?
Well, I was born in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and spent my formative years in the Bronx.
What part of the Bronx?
181st Street and Southern Boulevard.
Okay.
I went to DeWitt Clinton High School.
Mm-hmm.
It was an interesting experience. I lived right next to the Bronx Zoo, so I used to spend a lot of time in the zoo with the animals.
Okay. Prepared you for future warfare,
Yes.
Right? And so after your growing up and your formative years in the Bronx, where did you what did you do next? How did you get into
Well, I went to Iona College
Mm-hmm.
for a degree in physics, and the ROTC program, which was at Fordham University. That's where I got my commission as a second lieutenant infantry.
Okay. And when did you start your service in the Army?
Well, in July 1971, when I was commissioned, I then went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I was rifted, the reduction in force, in 1972. So my career was short-lived on active duty, but I was picked up by the Army Reserves, and I spent a career of 28 years in the Army Reserves with multiple deployments as part of the reserve program.
Right. So you're considered a Vietnam-era veteran, but you didn't serve in Vietnam.
That's correct.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your basic training experience, what you can remember of it. I always enjoy having some of our veterans, when they come on, talk about their experience. What do you recall about it?
Well, I was in top shape when I went in. I rode crew for Iona College. I was on their karate team, and so I was physically ready. So when I went through a basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, it wasn't physically difficult for me, but it was very enjoyable meeting people from all over the country in stressful training environments, including tunnel training.
Right.
So it was really an experience. And after I graduated from college, I got commissioned and went to Fort Benning again, where I went to the Infantry School. And that was a very rewarding experience.
Tell us about that. So you were commissioned as an infantry officer then, right? So additional training. How long was that roughly? And
About 6 months.
All right, 6 months of it, and then of course that's at a time when the war is troop reductions and starting to pull back. Correct?
That's correct. President Nixon made a reduction in force, ended the war in Vietnam, and me and a lot of other people were put on the unemployment rolls.
Right, right, right. But you ended up doing reserve duty for about 28 years, you said. So,
That's correct.
So what was that like? I mean, with the reserve training, and where did you go for that typically?
Well, I was with the 77 Army Reserve Command out of Fort Totten, and they worked in various positions. A good part of the career was for the 1163rd U.S. Air School, where I trained soldiers in different military occupational specialties, nuclear, biological, and training. That was part of my education, being a physicist. Melded very well with that. I ultimately, after some breaks, I ended up teaching Command and General Staff College at West Point non-resident course. That was a very rewarding experience as well. In the interim, I worked for Intelligence Security Command for 5 years, doing classified missions for them, which was interesting.
So, obviously some of that you can't speak about, but really a pretty diverse background. So, in your professional career as a physicist, where did you go with that?
Well, I started out doing non-destructive testing,
Mhm.
using radioisotopes and dye-penetrant magnetic particle testing on bridges and aircraft and pipelines and so forth. And I ended up working for a company by the name of Abasco. They're a constructor, design, build. So I ended up building nuclear power plants in the U.S. and
Wow.
Philippines. So that was an experience by itself.
Yeah.
Most rewarding is to actually start up a nuclear power plant and see it, the fruition of the
Right.
benefits. So during Katrina, when New Orleans was out of everything, Waterford Electric, which is a plant that I worked on, operated completely through that
Oh, wow.
program. And St. Lucie in Florida operates today the lowest cost power in the country.
And that was
Those
one
are
of
projects I
the projects
participated
you worked
in.
on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very rewarding. But I have to imagine, particularly after Katrina, I was down in New Orleans before and immediately before and immediately after Katrina, within 6 months on either side, and it was just a dramatically different experience. But certainly rewarding that to see a project that you did that survived that.
And after Katrina, I worked there for 6 months doing recovery. And
Right.
my pride at that time was restoring the Southern University, where I built 45 buildings in 44 days
Wow.
to reopen the school in February.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that was an experience.
Yeah, life-altering experience. So then, let's kind of move forward to 9/11 and your activities after 9/11. So maybe you could speak to us about that. Well, do you remember where you were on 9/11? What that
That was downtown Manhattan.
Okay, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, after I observed the hole in the Tower 1, and I knew it wasn't anything possible to happen by accident. So that was a concern. We had a meeting scheduled in that building that morning, but
Wow.
we were bumped and ended up at the Con Ed facility on 14th Street for our meeting. That was a horrendous experience. Very little that you could do in the aftermath. What I ended up doing is working with the New York District Corps of Engineers, getting permit and dredging Claremont Channel, which allowed ships to come in and load steel from the debris from the Trade Center.
Wow.
Because before they were loading at sea, which is very, very dangerous operation. So being able to have the ship come in to Claremont Channel and load directly made a remarkable difference and speeded up the recovery of that project.
And you worked on that project.
Yeah, and from midnight to 8 o'clock, I worked in the Caveman Point Corps of Engineers facility, doing the dark shift. So I volunteered to go in and work for them.
Wow.
And the commander of the New York District, his next command after that was Afghanistan. And he asked me to join him there. So I got reinstated with my rank and security classifications.
And so obviously you had top secret security clearance, and you were a staff officer then over in Afghanistan. What part of Afghanistan were you stationed
Well,
in?
I worked through most of Afghanistan. The district, Afghanistan Corps of Engineer District, had responsibility throughout the country. My first few months was in Kabul. And then I was moved to Zabul province, where I was a resident engineer and worked on a number of different projects. The operations in Afghanistan had a lot of different functions. There's daytime warfighters that gave presence of force and took care of trouble spots. There were the nighttime warfighters, which were the security folks that special ops that had a lot of language expertise and were embedded in the towns and villages, which provided a lot of support and got bad guys. There were the embed soldiers, Those are the soldiers assigned as a unit with the Afghan National Army to help train them. And then there was a provisional restoration team, which would go into a village with a bag full of money, hire somebody who knew how to build a rock wall, and nearly every village had people that could build a rock wall. And then we would teach them how to build buildings. And we had 3 projects in every village. One to build a district center where people could assemble and vote and begin to have their own government. We built a clinic that would take care of animals and people, pull teeth,
Right.
and that would attract people to come to a village. And then when you see larger numbers of people coming to a village, we built a police station to house the security for them. So every place we had 3 projects. So
Wow.
I had 12 villages, 36 projects that was different stages of completion.
Wow.
That was rewarding, particularly working with the Afghan people. We had 14,000 people registered to vote in Zabul province, and all but 2 voted.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
When
The
you
2
thi-
that didn't vote were killed on the
Oh.
way. Yeah.
Well, when you think about what people went through back then, both in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but particularly just those were yeoman efforts, but what people face, and when you think here in our country, I mean, we just had this past local elections, and I think 30% of the people in the town voted, which is, it's pretty good for a local election, but it's when you think people had to facing, death threats, going to vote, 2 people killed on the way to vote, and you get turnout 99 point whatever percent. That's just absolutely incredible.
It's sad that in the United States, the voting population doesn't appreciate the ability and freedom that they have to do that.
I totally agree. Totally agree. So you were stationed over in Afghanistan for that tour for about
202 days. Yeah.
202 days, and obviously, I've known your wife for a number of years through Leadership Rockland. We were in the same class together back in 2002. So it must have been difficult on your family, having you over in a war zone. What was that experience like? How did you keep in contact with your family when you were over there?
Well, being part of the Corps of Engineers gives a lot of flexibility for communication that most soldiers don't have. We would go from location to location and install communication systems and IT. That was part of our function. So I had the ability to have phone calls, and I had my personal phone, and I'd get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. Joe, I haven't seen you for, where are you? I'm in a bunker because there's a mortar attack.
That's funny.
So we did have ability to communicate. We had internet ability as well at that time, even 2005, which was pretty remarkable. It was very difficult on my wife because my son Joe was in the Marines, and my daughter Andrea was in the Air Force. She was a doc in the Air Force. So it was pretty tough for me after retirement to go back and
go back and then be involved. Now, you were awarded the Bronze Star for your service.
Yes, that's correct.
That's not everybody receives a Bronze Star. That must be something that you and your family are very proud of, I would imagine.
It's a great honor, but I feel like it was a reward for going to work every day.
Well, still, but not everybody goes to work every day in a war zone. After doing your time and retiring, coming back to active duty. Let's talk a little bit as well with with your service and your experience. The current situation in Afghanistan, without getting too political, but obviously you've probably kept tabs on what's taking place over there. What's your perspective on how things are going in Afghanistan now?
Well, it's very tough. It's been tough there for thousands of years. It's a remarkable country. The people, they'll lie, steal, and cheat, and then they'll give their lives for you.
Right.
so it's very tough to understand how they operate and what they think, and their ability to vote for a representative in a government. It was such a change. I mean, they didn't have a banking system.
Right.
So, for example, soldiers and police officers got paid in cash once every year, maybe. And then what they do? They would go home and bring the money to their families. So in the U.S., we would report that as desertion.
Right.
They weren't deserting. They just took them a month by the time they walked home and back.
Yeah, so very, very different cultural change. But it's remarkable that, look, you know, obviously we're still there, and there's still elements there that don't want the U.S. there. But the fact that the country is as stable as it is really a credit to, I would imagine, a lot of the work of you and you know, hundreds of thousands of others like you that have served there over the last 17 years.
Well, it's an international effort. The Germans were the people responsible for training the police officers. We had a large part in that, providing them facilities and expertise and boots on the ground. The Italians were responsible for building and construction, a lot of things. It's a country that is very divided. There's like 36 or 37 provinces. Each province is like a warring neighbor. They speak different languages. Before I went there, I learned a little bit of Dari, so I could communicate. And I found that when I moved to Zabul province, which is near Kandahar, they spoke Pashto. And I had a Dari interpreter with me. And they didn't want to talk to him. They hated him. So I ended up intermediating. They wanted to talk to me. And then up in the north, they speak Tajiks, a different language. So it's really a diverse and difficult country to assemble and bring together.
Yeah, I would imagine. And it's been that way historically, you know, going back for 1,000 years. There's been conflict in that area forever, it seems like. So what's your proudest moment of your service throughout your entire career, would you say?
Well, none of my kids got hurt.
And your son was...
So we lost 11 from my fire base while I was there, but none of those soldiers were in my direct control. And I spent hours and hours every night planning the next day's missions and how to make sure that we would be very safe. I'd coordinate artillery and helicopter support and fast movers if we need them. So wherever we went, I was well covered to make sure my kids would be protected as much as we could be. That's
incredible. And you did, so your guys were safe, but there were 11 that were lost from the base. Wow. Just, you know, that's the difficulty when in talking with vets such as yourself that have had that combat experience, even with my my nephew, you know, there were guys in his base that were lost. My nephew, you know, happened to save his squad when they were out on patrol. That's what he was awarded, the Bronze Star, you know, with a V for Valor Oak Leaf Cluster for his service. But you know, that never leaves you, and you can see it whenever you talk with a vet. Just briefly, we're about out of time, but your family. So I mentioned your wife, Maria, who I've happened to have known for about 17, 18 years now, but maybe just briefly, where do you live in the town, and your kids, and what are they doing now?
Well, I live in Valley Cottage. I lived there since 1980. It's a great community to bring up a family. I had 3 kids. One a Marine. We lost him from a post 9/11 rare cancer.
I'm sorry.
And my daughter got out of the Air Force as a major. She's a doctor in Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. She's married to Chad Scholes, who's a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. He now works for the Metro North Railroad as operations guy. And my son Tom is an attorney, and he works as an attorney recruiter. Now he lives in Hoboken. So, and my daughter lives in Manhattan.
Oh, great.
So we have grandkids with everybody. So we have 5 grandchildren now, and keeping very much involved with their actions and behaviors. The newest one came this past November.
Oh, congratulations.
So we're pretty delighted to live here in this country.
Well, Joe, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for being such a wonderful, wonderful guest, and more importantly, I want to thank you for your exceptional career, your professional career, but your service to our country. You know, as a commissioned officer, security clearance, war veteran, and all that you've contributed in so very many ways. We're very grateful for your service, and I want to thank you. Not for just being a great guest, but for being an exceptional person and a great American patriot. Thank you.
Before I leave, I did want to mention that the Sheriff Lou Falco, that you know very well, he has continued this counterterrorism task force that I'm in, and that was started by Sheriff Kralik, and it's made up of retired law enforcement and military folks. It's a great honor to participate with this group of experts that continues today to help make our county safe.
Oh, no, absolutely, and we're fortunate here in the town of Clarkstown. I won't mention the officer's name, but we actually have an officer that, for the first time ever, we've actually sent to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. He took about a year to get us through the process for his training and his security clearance, and he started here last year working for the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is a combination of New York City Police, local police departments, the FBI, other Homeland Security, and other federal assets. And we've already seen the difference. In fact, with some of the with the most recent incident that took place with that horrendous attack in Muncie, our police officer was on the JTTF. I was involved in some level with that, the investigation as well. And it's an unfortunate commentary on the state of the world that we need to have a terrorist task force, but we need them, and it's great that, you know, what the Sheriff's Department does certainly is an integral unit to the Sheriff's Department in helping to keep us all safe. Thank you for that continuing service as well. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.